And I say to her, I wish Jesus would come and tell me what he's all about. And I'll tell you, as soon as I said the words, I could feel something happening. We lived in a mobile home at the time. I went into the living room with a jiggle pad, and I had this sort of waking vision in which Jesus is standing on this mountain. He's looking at humanity, and he says, "You can do the things that I do." And then he looked away, and there were more mountaintops. And he looked back at us, and he said, "And greater things than these shall you do." So, what that led to me believe it speaks greatly about our own potential within us, but it speaks to the journey, even for Jesus, any of our greats, Buddha, any of them, it's an infinite journey.
Welcome, everyone, to the Spiritual Forum. I'm so glad you're here. We are starting off the year with some great guests, and I'm so excited to introduce you to my guest today. But first, I just want to thank everyone for joining us and for subscribing and engaging on YouTube and on the audio podcast platforms. And don't forget that you can subscribe to my newsletter at thespiritualforum.org, and I send out a weekly newsletter with the most current podcast, some clips from the prior podcast, some inspiration, my reflections on how the interview went, and all sorts of interesting things like that. So I'd love for you to be a part of my newsletter list. And that's all I have to say today. I want to introduce you to my guest. Jim Rosemergy is an ordained minister, a prolific author and mystic, and he had a very interesting former life. He was a naval aviator who flew over 100 combat missions during Vietnam War, and he was also a teaching tennis pro. During his 40-plus years of ministry, he pioneered 2 churches. I pioneered one. I think it's really hard work, so kudos to you, Jim.
It is.
We can talk about that in a minute. You also serve 3 additional congregations, and you are an executive vice president of Unity World Headquarters. But all those facts don't define Jim Rosemergy as an explorer of spirituality filled with wonder and curiosity, 2 of my favorite things. Jim is dedicating the remainder of his years to global spiritual awakening. Now, Jim, I counted, I might be off, I think you've written about 15 books, is that right?
17. And
Okay.
I just posted this morning that number 18 is in the hands of a professional editor, and you may know him, Bill Worth, because he's a Unity minister, but a newspaper man and so forth. So he has the latest one, and I'm just waiting for him to get it back to me, and then it begins its publishing process. So then 18 will be out there probably sometime in 2025.
Wow. Okay, so I just want to tell my audience, I have 6 of them. And I'm pretty impressed with that because I don't think I have 6 of any other author. But anyway, welcome, Jim. I'm so glad to have you today.
Thank you. It's a joy to be here.
Yeah, so it's really kind of interesting. You really don't know who I am so much, but I know who you are because I have used your books and your ideas in my own ministry. And today, my husband and I were coming back from the YMCA. We work out every morning, and he's like, "Who are you interviewing today?" I said, "Jim Rosemergy." He goes, "Oh, wow, that's really big." And I talk to people from around the world, but he knows that you're an important person in my life because of the influence you had on my own ministry. So anyway, we could talk about that in a little bit too. Before we get into your story, we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, that you'll be willing to answer a few rapid fire questions, and we'll see how this goes. Are you ready to go?
Yeah, let's do it. It sounds like Jon
Okay.
Stewart or Stephen Colbert on the Colbert questionnaire.
We'll see how it goes. Okay, what's your either A or your favorite place?
Place to be?
Yeah.
Somewhere in nature, usually in the mountains, And in this case, I'm talking to you from Blue Ridge Mountains at about 2,000 feet above sea level. So I just loved it, in the wilderness, out in the woods.
Okay. All right. Who do you most admire?
Hmm. Well, I should say my wife, and that's true. Just, we've been married 54 years, and just watching her and the way she responds and her caring spirit. So, picking someone really close to me, that's pretty special. And then one of my best friends just died in September, 98 years old, a man named Ed Davenport. And he was someone that we just hung out heart to heart for many, many years. Met him in my first ministry, and we were best friends. So he was someone to admire for sure.
Okay. All right. And what is a meaningful quote or phrase or message, a short snippet?
Yeah, the one that's probably most important for me that actually shifted my life, it was Jesus' statement of seek first the kingdom and everything else will be added unto you. We can talk about that more as to why that is the case, because it made a large shift in my spiritual journey as I put that to the test. It wasn't just something, oh, that sounds good, I like it. It was, I must test this.
Yeah, I think it's a centerpiece of what you teach and what you share in your own message. Okay, and last, what are 3 words that would best describe you?
Child, explorer, and I wouldn't say mystic, but I would say mystically inclined.
Okay. Okay. I called you a mystic, but maybe that was
Shame on you, shame
first.
on you. Just kidding, just kidding.
My mystically inclined. I'll change that in the bio.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much for playing with that. It's always kind of fun to see what's on a person's mind. So why don't you share now? What is your journey? It's such an interesting journey. And I know we could talk for hours about it, but if you were to succinctly kind of share your spiritual journey, I mean, going from, this aviator to teaching tennis pros to becoming a minister and mystically inclined, it's not the typical journey. So why don't you just share a little bit about it?
Well, I wrote a book, The Autobiography of a Christian Heretic. And, if you were to ask me that question, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it hadn't really been difficult to answer the question. And, but, I think there comes a time in our lives, and this is going on all the time in a way, where we're reflecting on our lives and what it means and decisions we've made and mistakes we've made and all those things. But there comes a time when you take a look at yourself and say, what has my journey been like? And so when I wrote that book, it would really, it's a lot of events and happenings, but it's really about my inner journey. And I don't even put this in the book, but, I was thinking about this because you had said we'd reflect a little bit on the spiritual journey. And I was thinking about, where's the beginning of all that? Where's the evidence that some type of spiritual journey is going on? And I think part of it is when I was a little guy, I had a propensity for silence. I can remember being, 6 or 7. I'm on Ocracoke Island off the coast of North Carolina, Superior Island. My grandparents lived there. We spent summers there. And I can remember as a little guy just sitting on the shore, Atlantic Ocean just pounding. I'm not meditating. I don't even know the word. I'm not praying. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just sitting there. And then I remember like age 11 or 12, I'm a Boy Scout and in my Boy Scout camp and, we're running around, we're doing all kinds of things. But then I kind of slip away and I just go into some kind of thicket of trees or whatever. And I just, bushes and no one can see me. And I'm just sitting there. What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. But the draw was to come into that silence and then to see what would unfold from there. And, if I look ahead, then I see another important idea in my life, which is that psalm, be still and know that I am God. And just in recent years, recent months, I've actually thought more about stillness. Why stillness? And I go back into the woods. If you go into the woods and you're hiking and you're moving through, you miss a lot of things.
Mhm.
But if you sit down, then you're watching for movement. And you don't see things sometimes unless they move. We live right next to the national forest. And so the deer, their fur now is the color of the tree trunks out here. And they're hard to see unless they're moving. So you're still so you can sense some type of movement, or you're quiet, you hear some kind of sound, or you can feel something like the wind, or maybe footfall on leaves, or whatever it is. But you miss it all unless you're still. And so the ultimate is be still and know that I am God. So what that stillness is really all about is a sensitivity. So I would putting it in this context. And then, when I was in ministerial school, I had an experience that was uh, really a key. And I think it was one of these things that kept driving me back from using spiritual principles purely about my earthly life to begin to utilize spiritual principles to become more aware for purpose of a spiritual awakening. What happened, and you may remember this from your training, but there was a class called Fillmore Fundamentals. And Charles Fillmore, being a co-founder of our movement, we were studying him. And there was actually the students, we actually taught the class, and there were three of us on a panel, and we were supposed to explore some subject of what Charles Fillmore thought about these things. And then we had to talk about what we thought about it. So our group got Jesus. So, I did some investigations of what Charles Fillmore believed about Jesus. And I remember my teaching pro days, tennis pro days. I came home, 10 o'clock at night. I'm talking to Nancy. Next day, I have to make the presentation with my buddies. And I say to her, I wish Jesus would come and tell me what he's all about. And I'll tell you, as soon as I said the words, I could feel something happening. We lived in a mobile home at the time. I went into the living room with a jiggle pad, and I had this sort of waking vision in which Jesus is standing on this mountain. He's looking at humanity, and he says, "You can do the things that I do." And then he looked away, and there were more mountaintops. And then he looked back at us, and he said, "And greater things than these shall you do." So, what that led to me believe for, it speaks greatly about our own potential within us, but it speaks to the journey, even for Jesus, any of our greats, Buddha, any of them, it's an infinite journey. And probably just one more story now, let us be, and then you can just jump right in. One day, this kind of fits in with this. I'm meditating, and this inner thought voice says to me, "Jim, you're halfway there." And I got a little puffed up about that, I was thinking, well, halfway there, and then, just one more step and I'm homeward bound. And so I'm getting a little puffed up. And then the voice says to me, "You're halfway there and you always will be." And, so I was just kind of, what does that mean? And so it took me a while. I was deflated, it took me a while to kind of explore that. And then I finally realized we're all halfway there. Even these giants are halfway there because why? Message from that thing long ago. It's an infinite journey. So we're always in the middle of it, and we always will be, whether we're just getting started or whether we've been at it for a long, long time. So anyway, that gives you maybe a feel for part of the journey, the way it began on the seashore in the woods. That's where it started.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I think it's really interesting that as a child, you were kind of called to the quiet and the silence. That seems unusual to me, and especially in this world that we live in now versus when you were a child is so much more distracting. And what it would take for a child now to be, called into the quiet and the silence in the woods. And that's really where I think our home is more, at least on this earth. But very interesting that you had that inclination early on.
Yeah, I mean, you're working on that book and then getting ready to be with you. I mean, you're the catalyst for this. So it's, I'm blessed already. Goodbye. I'll see you later. But the whole thing being, how did it really start? What's the evidence of me being not just a human being of flesh and blood, but something else moving? And it was sitting on the seashore in Ocracoke, and then at a Boy Scout camp, and then the journey going on from there. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and you say that you are dedicating your life to this global spiritual awakening. So do you think that that is what is happening with people right now? I mean, it's always been happening, but is there something that's kind of catalyzed and growing, do you feel right now in terms of people awakening?
Well, I think it's what we really need. I know there have been people involved in this, for a long, long time. And, all the people through all the ages that have spent time in monasteries and ashrams and, all around the world that dedicate themselves to stillness and that kind of connection. That is kind of a silent support for us. It's arms that embrace humanity. But this is a unique time. There has never in the history of humanity ever been a time like this. And it's not just this moment. It might be how maybe 5, 7 years ago that we moved into this place, maybe 10. But what I'm referring to is the fact that we, the people, we can connect with each other all across the globe through our technology. We've never been able to do that before. We have had groundswell movements before, of course, different countries, different places, and so forth. But we had the ability now to actually reach out to one another. It doesn't depend on governments, doesn't depend on a particular religion. We have the ability to connect and do the work. And I think that long ago, there's what I call the time of the one, where, you have, in Judaism, you have Moses in the beginning there, and then you have Buddha, then you have Jesus, then you have Muhammad. And so these are these spiritual giants that through the years, and others, of course, that they have laid out spiritual principles for us. And of course, most of humanity believes that in Judaism that there's going to be a Messiah that returns, portions of that. And Buddhism, they have an idea the Maitreya is going to return. And of course, Jesus is going to return for many Christians. And then for folks that are in Islam, then it's the hidden Imam. So the idea is that there's always going to be this return. And I don't believe it. In fact, I think it is a denial of the work of these spiritual giants. Because what's happened is that these people have given us everything we need. And then what we need to do, we the people, for the first time, need to come together and do that inner work to enter what at this point I would say, I would call it the time of the few that will eventually lead to the time of the many. But it doesn't take many of us, but we have to have a dedicated core of people around the world. And so I wrote this book, The Gathering of the Few, of Guide to Global Spiritual Awakening. And in that, I've said that, where I am in my life, I'm dedicated to that, to do my best to try for us to gather around this most critical time in history. There's never been another time like it. What an opportunity for us. So let's do it.
Yeah, the gathering of the few. I think people get overwhelmed with the world and what appears to people to be going wrong, no matter what side they're on. if
Yeah.
there are sides. They think the world's, as bad as it can be. And there is this kind of waiting for some savior, somebody to come help us. And I completely agree. It's like that's the easy way out, and that's not going to happen. It's like we're up, it's up to us.
Yeah.
But I think that the idea that a few of us can gather and make major change is something that most people just have trouble with. You talk about the 100th monkey story in your book, and I think most people know that.
Yeah.
And that's a true thing, right? That's true.
Yeah. Yeah. Not right. That would Ken Keyes had that in his book years ago. It caught fire and went all around, at least through our country and probably around the world. It was a remarkable situation and thing that happened within monkey consciousness. So, I always get people say, hey, if the monkeys can do it, maybe we can do it too.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe we have more blocks, but it's really inspired me because I do an annual retreat at Unity Village, and it's called Whole Planet Spirituality, and it really is about embracing the whole planet, and including the Fillmore's original teachings on our relationship with nature and animals and whatnot. And I think at that group we often get overwhelmed, like, oh, we have this vision, and we're so few, and the whole world is living in another paradigm, a much more violent war paradigm. And can we make an impact? And I think your book and your teachings would say, yes, the few are called together to raise our consciousness, and that in effect will change. But you also say we have to let go of the outcome.
Yeah, well, let's talk about some of the spiritual principles around that awakening. Because when you look at remarkable things that happened, it always starts with a few. Basically, it starts with one. And then it goes from there. And that's the way it was, with Buddha and then Jesus, Muhammad, and others all over the world. Always starts with one, starts with a few. And there are principles around this. One of the classics is Jesus' statement, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. And I think people look at that literally, and they're talking about some gathering of 2 or 3 people. They have a spiritual focus, and Jesus shows up. And there's an example in the scripture after Jesus has died, and there are a couple of guys going to Emmaus. There are hot springs there. These guys are going hot tubbing, and it's just outside of Jerusalem. And so they're on the way, and you get the impression they're sort of talking about all the events of what's happened in Jerusalem. And then this man joins them, and they spend time together, and then they're eating. And then Jesus is talking to them, and they recognize him. So it's like where 2 or 3, and there Jesus literally shows up. I have no doubt in my mind that that can't literally happen when a couple of people come together, that consciousness that is Jesus would show up. So no doubt about that. However, I think there's another meaning to that. And I'll give you the scriptural story for this, which is it's incredible, really. But the idea is that where 2 or 3 are gathered and focused on spiritual principles and ideals, what it does is it releases something from within them. And so that, I think, is at the foundation of what Jesus is talking about. You and me, we're together today. We're talking about spiritual things. We're candidates for the release of something within us so that you will walk away from this, I will walk away from it, and I will be someone I've never been before. And hopefully that happens for you as well. So there's that idea where Jesus expressed in that condensed form, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of that. And where did that come from? Well, a lot of his teachings actually didn't originate with him. They originated as a part of his culture and his religion, Judaism. He was a Jew. And this particular one originates with a story that's in Daniel of King Nebuchadnezzar and 3 guys, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. I always kid around and say to Nancy, man, if we could have some more kids, we ought to name them Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. Wow, to have kids with those names would be, doesn't get any better than that. So anyway, these guys, they're part of the elite. They've been brought out of Israel or Judea at the time. Israel probably would be, or Judah. They're brought into Babylon. They're to enhance the culture there. They have responsible jobs in the king's administration. And the king, Nebuchadnezzar, is kind of an egomaniac. He has a big statue made, has all made of gold, and as when certain tunes are played, everybody has to fall down and worship it. Well, these free Jews, they're not about to do that, and so they don't. And probably someone who is a Babylonian doesn't like the idea that these guys have these good jobs and they're not doing what the king says. So they get reported, they bring them before the king confronts them, and the threat for not bowing down is a fiery furnace. And so that threat is there for them. And they tell the king and say, yeah, we understand that, but we're not going to worship that. And if we die in the fire, so be it. So that's what you said. That's where that thing comes from. And it's a very important part of the spiritual journey. You have to let go of outcome. So they let go of the outcome. Doesn't do them any good. They still get bound up and they are thrown into the fire. And the king is there, I guess, to watch them burn. And then he looks in the fire and he says to his cohorts, how many guys we throw in the fire? And they say, 3, O king. And he says, well, I see a fourth one like the Son of God walking among the fire, or among the flames.
Yeah.
That's the idea of what Jesus was talking about. Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, spiritual purpose, there am I in the midst of them. That something is released. I call it the fourth one. And even Nebuchadnezzar recognizes it is something divine. And then the story goes on a little bit. It's kind of cool, where they bring them out, they don't even smell of smoke. So they are completely untouched by the condition. Each one of us in our own spiritual identity, whatever we're facing in our lives, who we really are, is completely untouched by whatever it is. And then the other side of the coin that stresses the idea that they are different. They are someone they've never been before. They're actually given more responsibilities than they had before. So when you face the challenge with your friends, you come together for a spiritual purpose. It releases something within you, and you become someone you've never been before. And now, Carol, just one more thing, if that's okay.
Sure.
This stresses the idea of it doesn't take a whole bunch. And there's a story of Abraham, and he's visited by some angels, some representatives of God. He has some type of insight. And he's told that where his brother Laban is living, that's Sodom, and Sodom and Gomorrah, they're going to be destroyed. So Abraham's upset about this, and he says, well, what if there's like 50 good people there? They're going to be destroyed? No. He says, well, how about 45? No, that's good. 40? No, that's good. 35? No, fine. 30? Good. 25? Fine. 20? Good. 10? Fine. Not going to be destroyed. He says, less than 10. And then, nope, that's the problem. So people look at that and they think of the tragedy of that. And of course, we have real difficulties with the whole concept of God doing such a thing per se. But what's the real message there? You can look at it as one of destruction and question the nature of God, or you can look at it, this is the way I look at it, in context with global awakening. It only takes a few people to hold off a whole bunch of negativity. It only takes a few. And so the idea of the global awakening, from my standpoint, we don't need millions and millions and millions. I don't know how many we need, but I know this, it's few. We only need a few. I don't know what it is. We just have to begin the work, take advantage of this unique time like no other on the history of the earth and our spiritual journey. It's never happened before. So let's do something with it and assume our responsibility. So that was a
It
long
is an
story. I apologize.
Oh, it's okay. No, it is an exciting time. There's lots of places I can go with that, but I do want to ask you when you're talking about awakening, what are you talking about? What does awakening mean to you?
Yeah, it's spiritual awakening. It's really at the very heart of Jesus' ministry. Christianity has become, and has been for a long, long time, it's a religion of salvation. We're going to be saved from fire, etc. But if you look at Jesus' ministry, and my next book I write is going to be on this, because Christianity has become a religion of salvation. It was meant to be, I believe, a religion of awakening. And one of the great stories of that is Jesus meeting with this guy, Nicodemus, who's a member of the Sanhedrin. He's a religious leader. He's coming to meet Jesus by night because he doesn't want to be seen by anybody. But he also comes in ignorance. He comes and he's got a question on his mind. He never really asked it, but Jesus knows it because it's on everybody's mind. Says to him, he's really saying, it's already here. And that's the way he started his ministry. He said, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's within our grasp. It's here. So for me, that's what spiritual awakening is all about. And it's not so much about our earthly experience as it is about discovering who and what we are and the connection we have with one another, with nature, caring, compassion, all kinds of wonderful, good stuff. But that's what I think Christianity it was supposed to be. And hopefully it will be one day.
Yeah, maybe this is a good time for you to share the first and second and third coming. You've touched on it with some of the things you've said so far, but I think this would be a good time to flesh that out.
Well, you do know about some of my writings, don't you? Yeah, I wrote a book called The Third Coming. And what happened with that, I was at Unity School working there, and the head of our books and publishing and things came to me and said, Jim, I have a title for a book for you. And I said, what is it? He said, The Third Coming. And he said, I'd like you to write a book on that. So I said, well, what's it about? And he said, I don't know. I just have the title. So I said, well, let me think about it. Because, Third Coming, what's that? And then we got First Coming. If there's a second coming, there's got to be a first coming. And what's this third coming? So anyway, I did a lot of thinking about it. And basically, the first coming is the spiritual giants arriving on the scene. And in Christianity, that's Jesus. For Buddhism, it's Buddha. So that's the first one. The second coming for most of humanity is when the spiritual giants, they return. But I don't believe that. I believe the second coming is that spiritual awakening in the individual's heart. So the second coming becomes immensely personal for each individual. So first coming, the spiritual giant, that's the time of the one. And then we have the second coming, which is, I think, underway and has been for thousands of years, where humanity, one person at a time, is waking up. And then there comes the third coming. And the third coming, as I portrayed it in the book, that's the global awakening. And there are principles around that. And you have Paul's statement, and we'll all be changed in the twinkling of an eye. So that got my attention. Well, wait a minute, because we're going person by person by person over thousands of years. But here's this, we'll all be changed in the twinkling of an eye. And then we got the 100th monkey that you referred to. Hopefully people know what we're talking about. And then this sudden transformation that takes place. I think there are principles around all of that. We've talked about some of them here. And we need to put them to the test, not just believe them. You have to put them to the test. Like seek first the kingdom, everything's added. Boy, what a promise that is. Be still and know that I am God. What a promise that is. But you got to put that stuff to the test. And then things happen to you.
Yeah, those scriptures, so many people just hear them as poetry or words or phrases, and they've just kind of come background noise for a lot of people. But what you're saying is these aren't just statements, they're invitations.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they're far from just words or poetry. I mean, they're challenges. Be still and know. So, and that never ends. I mean, that's that process going on. This whole idea about sitting in the woods and still and movement of spirit. I mean, now I'm sharing with things with you that are 2 months old, maybe 2 months. And then that seek first the kingdom years ago, I'm working with my spiritual principles in unity, and I'm applying it to my human existence, all my challenges and lack, etc. But it's something's missing. It's just really not working for me. And then so I saw that promise, seek first the kingdom, its righteousness, all things be added unto you. And I said, okay, I'm putting that to the test. And if it works, I'm staying in this thing called unity, and I'm in. If it doesn't, I'm out. I was a unity minister in Raleigh, North Carolina at the time. That's where I was. So I put it to a test, and here I am. I'm still standing. And the whole idea is, I haven't really prayed about anything in decades and decades and decades. I put that to the test. I found it to be true. If I awaken to the presence, then you have to be able to put up with the mystery because you don't know what's going to happen. But things unfold and you end up living a life.
Hmm. Yeah, what I remember most about some of your books that I used in my own ministry was that God it's so personal that we kind of come to the coffee shop and sit down with God and
Yeah.
get to know who God is and allow ourselves to be so vulnerable and make it so personal just to be known and to know and to I remember what was it, the high meadow, going to
Yeah.
the high meadow and allowing grace to take us higher, and that it isn't really about praying for things but for praying for the experience of the presence and just touching the hem of the garment
Yes.
and all that. It really shifted a lot for me about what prayer is, about who I am, what my journey is, what spirituality is all about. And and anyway, so I just wanted to acknowledge some of those things. Do you want to talk a little bit about like the high meadow and what that is?
Yeah, that's another one of those mountain images. It was part of my um, spiritual journey, still is. But the whole idea behind that is in order for there to be, true prayer and meditation, at least from my standpoint, there's got to be some waiting. A lot of times, back in the old days, the preacher preaches and asks for God or informs God usually. I don't know how an omnipresent God doesn't know, but anyway, informs God about this and that and the other thing and points out what needs to be done. And then you say amen, you go on your way. So that's kind of the beginning. And then it becomes affirmative. You're affirming what you want. And then when you're done, you say amen, you go on your way. And then there finally comes this process where the purpose is no longer of the world. The purpose is awakening. And that requires that stillness, that silence, that waiting. And so the image of the high meadow is climbing a mountain. And I've climbed some mountains in my day, Mount Katahdin in Maine, Mount Washington, and a couple times and so forth. And, it's tiring to climb mountains. You come to a place called the High Meadow up in the Presidential Mountain Range. There's a place called Monticello Lawn. And a lot of grass up there blown in one direction by the prevailing winds. But you can, if it's not cloudy, you can see 60 miles in one direction, 60 in the other. And so what you do in this image, You come to that high meadow, and of course you're heading for the summit of the mountain, but you can't see the trailhead because it's shrouded in mist and mystery. You can't go any farther. And I've been on Monticello Lawn, probably where it came from, in a storm where I couldn't see more than 20 feet in front of me. And so that's the image. You're there and you're waiting for grace because there's nothing you can do to go forward. There's got to be something transcendent. And so you're waiting for grace. And that's been expanded for me now. The waiting, I wait and love. We'll talk about that at some point. As I wait, I love. That's kind of a foundation of my prayer life now. But I'm waiting, and grace comes, takes me by the hand, leads me into the mist and into the mystery. So my work is to get to the high meadow. That's my prayer practice, whatever it is, whether it's a dance, a spinning a wheel, affirmations, denials, reading a prayer book, whatever it is. That's my practice. It lifts me up in consciousness. But this is important to know. You cannot, through your effort, I think, experience the presence of God. There has to be that time of, I let go of outcome. And so I do that at the high meadow. I've done my work. Although I must admit, being at the high meadow waiting is a lot of work. There's a lot of stuff that goes on there. And a lot of people just go back down the mountain. But you've got to learn to wait. But that's another story. And then you go on from there. So that's that image. And that was with me, and still is, but for a long, long time. And now I've sort of added to that, I suppose, that what do I do while I'm waiting? And I can come back to my affirmation and denial, my truth or whatever. But what happens when you wait is you don't get to meet God first. You don't get to meet grace first. Who you get to meet is you. And usually that's not particularly pleasant. And so up come memories, feelings, thoughts, circumstances, and those we often want to put aside. But that's part of us. And so I don't think we're really going to go higher until we learn to love those parts of ourselves. So as I wait, I love. And I had this experience, this is what really triggered it, in meditation, and a little voice within me saying, Jim, unless you accept your humanity, you won't be able to express your divinity. And I have been trying to circumvent that pain, those images, those memories, the guilt, the shame, all the things associated with being human. And I thought I'd found a way of life where I could do that. I could be happy. I would be positive. Didn't work for me. And so I had to become a responsible individual. I had to be willing to look at and embrace myself. I call that the sacred human. And the different feelings and thoughts and memories, shame, guilt, all of those, I call those dark stones. And you have to go into the cave, into the depth of yourself, take hold of the dark stone, and it needs to be refined because it's precious. Those dark stones are precious, but they have to be refined in a fire of love. And that's basically accepting yourself, taking parts of you and bringing them here, and taking hold of yourself. And so that's what I'm doing at the high meadow. That's what I'm doing while I'm waiting. Primarily, I'm being true to that, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Can't love your neighbor unless you love yourself. So there is that work, and it's not the most pleasant thing in the world, but it needs to be done. So, and that's what happens. One of the first things that happens in the silence. A lot of people, they want love, peace, and joy, but that's not what you're going to get. You're going to get something else, and that needs to have love brought to bear.
Yeah, the waiting is interesting because we're really not a waiting culture, and we're not really we're very impatient people. But just sticking with that journey, and I think your image of the cave is really, really a good one because that's part of the hero's journey too. Where the hero
Yeah.
embarks, and at the bottom he ends up going into the cave and doing the transformation work, and also Jesus in the tomb, the
Yes.
transformation work there.
Or
The
in the
cave is a
wilderness
really
too,
great metaphor. Right, right, right. Yeah, yeah. That's the work, and waiting is a really good word for it because we really like to distract ourselves. And I think the image of being at the high meadow with all that mist, I could see, just the temptation is always there to go back out and to stay in there. And that's seeking the kingdom, staying in there, staying with it,
Yeah.
staying with yourself, and allowing what arises to arise and loving it all. I think that's such a beautiful, beautiful way to share the journey, share what the spiritual awakening looks like. Would you be willing to also share about forgiveness? I know in your autobiography, I think you talk about forgiveness, and you talk about how well, it's just different because a lot of people think forgiveness is forgetting or just getting over it. A lot of people think that forgiveness is just letting go of the burden. But you have another way of looking at forgiveness. Do you know what I'm talking
Yes,
about?
I do.
Yeah.
I have a little statement that I've come to. It took a while to get there, years. And it is all forgiveness is self forgiveness. People do things to us, say things about us. They're hurtful. They can be horrific. They should have never been done. No one is listening to this should hear me say that we're pushing that aside at all. However, what happens, I mean, take an event that happens, for instance, a rape, for instance. That's an event that happens at a time for a certain period of time, but boy, that doesn't end when it's over.
Mhm.
And, there's all kinds of anger and rage and shame and guilt and all kinds of emotions that come up, hatred perhaps, towards that other person. All of that stuff lives in us whenever we've experienced some sort of slight or something horrific like that. And so most forgiveness people think about, I've got to forgive the other person. I would say, no, first thing is following Jesus in the statement, love your neighbor as you love yourself. If forgiveness is a return to love, and we want to get to the point where we're not filled with hate and so forth, we're going to have to love ourselves. So all that stuff that we're talking about that's inside, we got to take that into the cave. We need to look at those dark stones and do our inner work of embracing those parts of us. And the things for me, I have the 6 words that I work with in my own interior life. When things are really out of hand, and something is greatly disturbing for me. Once I get tired of letting it do that, I work with 6 words. It is, God is, I am. So it's not good, not bad. It is. Then I go to the highest truth I know, God is, and then the highest truth I know about myself, I am. And so I just work with those 6 words sort of in a repetitious way. And I work on accepting, not pushing those aside. I did that for years. Maintenance on myself. That's not what's called for. What's called for is acceptance of myself. Okay, I had been filled with hate. I can think in an instant and guilt have flood over me, or shame, all those things. I need to be able to accept these things about myself because unless I accept myself, parts of myself, I won't be able to express my divinity. The wonderful thing about all of that work, the things that humanity honors and respects the most are things like compassion, love, acceptance, non-resistance, patience. These qualities of soul, these things move us, and we try to live life that way. And we fail again and again and again. The reason is because those qualities of soul, compassion, acceptance, patience, non-resistance, all of those things, you know where we learn those? In the cave. We learn those things in prayer and meditation. That's why that journey is so incredible for us, because that's where those qualities are developed. You don't develop them running around out here in your life. You develop them in stillness, then you test them in your life, and you find out where you really are. And then back into the cave again, there it is.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
it may sound scary, and, it can be, but after a while, you're so accepting of yourself, for the most part, that you say, okay, back to the cave. And a lot of times when I do a workshop, I actually pass out dark stones, and I ask people to carry them in their pocket or in their purse as a reminder to accept themselves as they are. So that's where all that stuff develops in prayer and meditation. It doesn't develop by just being a nice guy or gal out in the world. We try, but
Yeah, and if I may be mistaken, but I think you also talked about how when you rise in consciousness that you become like another person that wasn't even the same person that was wronged.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the thing
Yeah.
is, in order to be really free, you have to become someone that you've never been before. And you have to the way they would say that in the Bible is you have to have a new name. And
Uh-huh.
you got
Uh-huh.
time for a
Or born
Bible?
again,
You
maybe?
got a time for another quick Bible story?
Sure.
There's a story of Jacob and Esau, and these are two brothers. They're struggling in the womb. Esau's born first, then Jacob is born, and that's an important thing because the firstborn is going to become the eventual leader of their clan, of their family. And Esau's kind of a guy who watches football games in the afternoon and goes out and hunts. And Jacob kind of hangs out with his mother and does some cooking. So one day he's a man, he's out, he's come back, he hasn't been successful with catching any game, he's hungry, and Jacob is cooking this little uh, stew. Smells really good. So Esau wants some and asks about it, and Jacob says, yeah, okay, if you give me your birthright, I'll do it. So like a fool, Esau says, okay. And so, he's sort of the stomach, you know what I mean? And so he gets that. And then, there comes a time when Isaac is going to actually bless the new leader of the clan. And so Jacob and his mom, they dress him up in animal skins, sort of like Esau. He's a hairy guy. And make him smell like Esau. He goes in and he gets the blessing. And then the dad finds out about it. He's really ticked. And off he goes. He has to flee for his life. Esau's going to go after him. And he spends a whole bunch of years because Jacob basically is a con man. And he gets conned. And there's a whole bunch of incredible stories. I mean, what a movie the whole thing would make. So anyway, there comes a time Jacob has prospered. And he's coming home. And he finds out Esau's coming to greet him with 400 men of war. So he goes, he's concerned, splits up his family in two pieces. So if one gets slaughtered, the other will live. He goes across a place called Jabbok Ford, and he's by himself. And you know that story. He sort of wrestles with God, with an angel, with himself. And I'm not quite sure who he's wrestling with, but he's distraught. And he has this famous statement, I won't let you go unless you bless me. So he gets a blessing. And this is the cool part. It's what you're talking about. His name is Jacob. That means supplanter. He supplanted his brother. His new name is Israel. It means Prince of God. So in that wrestling at Jabbok Ford, guess what's happened? Jacob has become someone else. someone he's never been before, someone that's never called his brother, got a different name even. And so he meets his brother, Esau, gives him a gift. They fall upon one another and they are reconciled. What happens there and what could have happened if Jacob did not become a new person, if he remained Jacob, I believe he would have died. But he became someone different that had not wronged his brother and deceived his father. And that person could embrace. And so that's what has to happen with us. It is not a matter of solving problems. That's not it. It's having the fourth one emerge. It's becoming someone we've never been before. It's about a new name. I led a trip to Israel one time. We went to the River Jordan. We had a baptism in the water. And everybody that came forward, and I baptized them, I asked them when they came after our time together, when I touched them with the water, hands, heart, head, I asked them, I said, do you know your new name? And of course, nobody knew that was coming. And they were, no. And I said, well, it's coming. You will know it in short order. You will know your new name. Some people knew it, and they reported to me later what it was. But that's what has to happen. Not solve the problem. You have to become somebody you've never been before. Those kind of thoughts and approaches, that changes you.
Yeah. That's the message. That's the message of the spiritual path, that transformation.
Yeah.
The idea of becoming somebody who was not harmed in the past. It's interesting that person harmed the other person that I was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so therefore it's like I'm not, of course I'm not carrying the burden because I'm another person.
Yes, right.
And also the perpetrator, that person becoming another person is also not the same person who, was harmful. So
yes.
Yeah.
It's not just beholding the Christ in them, but it's you becoming someone who can actually see the Christ, or even more. There's more dynamics going on there. So that the little statement of all forgiveness is self-forgiveness, that puts the work that only we can do at our doorstep. I mean, the other person, let's face it, with what they've done, there's guilt, shame, there's all kinds of stuff going on there. They have to do the exact same thing that you and I have to do. There's no difference there. Different circumstance and different stories, but same work.
Yeah. All right. We're coming up on our hour. I want to give you the last word, but before I do that, I would like
You sure
to
you
know.
want to do that?
I do want to do that. But before that, I want the second to last word. I'd like to know your book, An Autobiography of a Christian Heretic. Would you share with us why you would consider yourself a Christian heretic?
Well, I've never called myself that, but I think probably some people would call me that.
Okay.
Matter of fact, I had a phone call from my high school tennis coach, who's probably like 90 years old the other day, and I had sent him a copy of the book. He's a staunch Catholic, wonderful guy, just love him. And we were talking about that book, and he said, maybe I'm coming over to your way of thinking because I didn't think of your book as being too heretical. And I said to him, well, take a closer look. So
Read it
he's
again.
going to take a look at it, and then he's going to get back to me. But, the whole idea behind the heresy is the simple truth that what we consider to be true today, we may find to not be true tomorrow. And so there's a chapter in the book towards the end that says it's all heresy, meaning that those things that we hold most dear, at some point, we're probably going to need to release them and let them go. I've got a new book coming out, and there's a reference in there to new wine and old wine and new wineskins and all of that. And the whole idea behind that thing is that kind of change that, you can't put new wine in old wineskins. You've got to become somebody different. So the whole process in there is that kind of a transformation, and that kind of childish look at things. And I'll explore it. And when I look at my life, even my prayer life, it is constantly in motion. And we haven't even talked about it, but where I am now is my life is a prayer that God is praying. So that's another whole point of discussion, we won't be getting into, but it just keeps going on and on and on, and where it'll end up, I really don't know. So it's all heresy, meaning that what we consider most true today, we might just want to set aside tomorrow.
Yeah. So, so like our spirituality or our beliefs, anyway, that should be kind of fluid. Like it may change. Our understanding of the truth is not absolute.
Absolutely, that's right. Well, it's like one of the Jesus said, in order to see the kingdom, you got to have a spiritual awakening, and he said, in order to enter the kingdom, live in it, got to be like a child. And this is where something that's so dear to you comes in, and that's curiosity and wonder. There was a time in the past when religion was awe. It was wonder. That's when we were around the campfire at night and we looked up and there was no temple. There was just a canopy of stars. And can you imagine those folks? No education, something streaking across the sky, and the sense of awe and wonder. And, we've sort of, religious folks have turned it into fear, but that's not what it was to begin with. It was awe and wonder. And so that's what happens when you're willing to kind of set it aside and explore something different, and you can pick it up again or not. But you have to be like a kid, and be curious. It's the evidence of God in us, I think, is so obvious. It's curiosity. That's God moving in us. And it's right at the very beginning. It's when we draw our breath, when we stick our hand in our mouth for the first time. What's this? Turns out to be us.
Oh, and all we have to do is watch a small child who is in awe and curiosity and wonder, especially during this Christmas season.
Yeah,
just those eyes, and what is all this? And I remember taking my first daughter for a walk. I mean, I saw it with my other daughters as well, but with my first child, I saw it the most. I just remember taking her for a walk in her stroller, and her eyes just being so big, and like I think she was seeing just the leaves quaking, in the wind. And it was like, wow. And it was like who she was versus how I looked at those leaves. To me, I've got my grocery list, I've got my work, I've got all this stuff on my mind. And she was like really taking in just the quaking of the leaves. That's the child we are to become.
She didn't realize that when she got older, she was going to have to rake those leaves.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it is that I think there are two evidences of God in us. Curiosity is number one. Second one is desire. Curiosity and desire drive us. Desire is a little tricky because we can have desires that are unwholesome and are selfish and such. But if you trace any desire, the word desire meaning of the Father or from above, if you trace a desire back to its origin, you will find it is to know God as source, to express love or whatever. The desire has a holy, holy quality to it if you trace it back that far. And that becomes key for us. So curiosity, wonder, desire. People say, how can you prove to me there's God? That's my proof right there. That's been moving every human being who's ever breathed on this planet. Those things have moved them. Curiosity and wonder when they're younger, hopefully when they're older, and then desire. But trace it back to the source or you can get in a little trouble.
Oh, I love that. Okay. If you're willing, I'd love to have you back on another time when we can talk about life of prayer and all sorts of other things. But I do want to close. Is there anything else that you'd like to share today before we close?
Well, a little self-serving, but there's a new book coming out, and I think it's going to be a little hardback. Don't know for sure yet. We'll see. But it's called A Little Book of, let's see, let me get the title right here. A Little Book of Big Questions About Prayer, or a little book of big questions about prayer. So,
Okay.
so I've got all these different questions that we ask, and so look forward. It's in the hands of the editor right now, and then when he gets back, then it begins his journey to come into print. So who knows when that will be, but the process is underway, and so I hope everybody will take a look at it and see what they think. And a lot of the things we're talking about here, some of them are in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any idea when it's going to come out?
No, not really, because I just need to get it back from Bill, and then
Okay.
I have to integrate his edits,
Okay.
and then I go from there. So
Well, I can have you back when it comes out too. So we'll have links to your website and your other books and all of that as well, and the Christian Heretic. And this gift gatherings of the few. I love little books.
yeah,
I love little books. I can handle a little book. I read a book a week for my podcast, so it's really nice when they're little. But this one's packed. It's packed, and it's really inspirational for what's going on right now. So I'll have a link to that book too in the show notes.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, that book actually has a whole process there how to form your own group, and we've
Yes,
had a
it
group
does.
that met at our house for months doing that work.
Yes, yeah. I might use it at my retreat this year, so it's inspiring to me. So, well, thank you, Jim, so
Thank
much
you.
for coming on. You are an icon in unity, and you're not a mystic, you're mystically inclined. Is that what you said?
Yeah,
Okay, you're mystically inclined and just an inspiration for so many of us. So I really, really appreciate your coming on, and I look forward to having you on again if you want to come back on to the
sure, you
Spiritual
bet,
Forum
you
podcast.
bet.
Yeah.
You're lots of fun.
Okay. Yeah, it is great. This is great. And I just want to thank all of our listeners. And I know you were blessed a lot from this conversation today. And I now close the Spiritual Forum.